A karate master decided to showcase his skills by attacking a royal guard. What happened next shocked everyone. You won't believe how this story ends. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and let's promote respect for the royal guard together. Let the whole world see how many of us there are. London basked in the glow of the midday sun, and Buckingham Palace stood majestically against a clear blue sky. The square in front of the palace was alive with excitement. Tourists clicked away on their camera, children laughed, and guides regaled eager listeners with stories of British royalty. Everything seemed perfect until a subtle tension began to ripple through the air. Jack Randall was the source of that tension, standing out in the crowd like a dark shadow on a sunny day. The 35-year-old man had an aura of cockiness about him. His close-cropped dark hair, piercing gray eyes, and muscular build gave him an imposing presence. His tight athletic shirt accentuated his physique, making him look more like a competitor in a fighting arena. A tourist in one hand had toyed with a water bottle, flipping it casually to draw attention to high. Himself, Jack was a former champion from the United States, and he had come to London to witness the legendary British discipline. But instead of being impressed, Jack saw the guards as easy targets, fodder for his sharp tangi and inflated ego. Look at these guys, Jack sneered, his voice cutting through the general murmur of the crowd. Statues in uniform, that's all they are. Several heads turned toward him, their owners frowning in disapproval. But Jack wasn't deterred. In fact, to thrive the attention, Jack, come on, relax, on of his friends said, nervously trying to de-escalate the situation. It's just a ceremony, Jack smirked, turning his gaze toward the nearest guard. I could take all of them down with one punch. They don't even know how to fight. This word sparked murmurs among the onlookers, some of whom began to edge away from him. Others discreetly raised their phones, sensing that something extraordinary or disastrous was about to unfold. At this post, not far from where Jack was standing, was Richard Hunt, a tall, composed royal guard. His crimson tunic and gleaming goltons shone under the sun, while his iconic bearskin cap added to his commanding presence. Richard's face was stoic, his gaze fixed straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to them and taunting him. Yet a slight tightening of his jawline betrayed his heightened awareness. Years of training had taught Richard not to respond to provocations, no matter how blatant. Rule number one, stay disciplined. Jack's sharp eyes locked onto Richard. There was something about the guard's unyielding composure that fueled his need to provoke further. Watch this, Jack said to his friends, leaning in with a sly grin. I'm about to give it the masho. The crowd around them began to sense the rising tension and instinctively created a wider berth around Jack and Richard. Tourists whispered to one another, their voices stinged with anticipation and unease. Phones were held higher, recording the scene as it unfolded. Richard, standing tall and silent, maintained his position despite the looming confrontation. Hey you, Jack shouted, stepping closer to the barrier. His voice echoed across the square. Are you even alive, or are you just part of the scenery? Richard didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his expression unchanging. But Jack took the lack of reaction. As a challenge, I'll bet $100 you won't even flinch it. If it take his wing at you, Jack declared, loudly laughing. As she turned to his friend, Chastant drew a louder reaction from the crowd, which buzzed with a mix of outrage and apprehension. This is going too far, an older woman whispered, clutching the arm of a younger couple beside her. Someone needs to stop, a man in a suit muttered, holding his phone steady to capture the unfolding drama. But noon stepped in. Jack's towering physique and aggressive demeanor kept everyone at a distance. Meanwhile, Richard remained at the epitome of calm, though his stare seemed to sharpen as she watched Jack close the distance, emboldened by the silence of both the guard and the crowd. Jack took another step forward, his grin widened into a predatory smile. What's wrong, cat? Got your tongue? He jeered, leaning over the barrier. Let's see how unshakable you really are. The air grew thick with tension, each passing second feeling like an eternity. The crowd collectively held its breath, sensing that a critical moment was imminent. Jack, basking in the spotlight of his self-created spectacle, leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a taunting whisper. Well, are you ready to lose that cool facade? For Richard, maintaining his composure wasn't just about discipline. It was about honor beneath his stoic exterior. His instincts sharpened, preparing him for whatever might come next. And for the crowd, the scene before them felt like the calm before an explosive storm. The square in front of Buckingham Palace was engulfed in a tense stillness. The usual hum of tourist chatter faded, giving way to an oppressive silence, interrupted only by Jack Randall's voice emerging from the crowd like a predator searching for prey. Jack's confident, almost theatrical movements made it clear he was there for a performance. Hey, soldier boy, he shouted as she stepped closer to the barrier, his sharp booming voice echoed off the palace walls. Show me what you've got, or are you just a decoration on this square? The crowd, tensed people whispered among themselves, and several quickly pulled out their phones to record what was unfolding. Jack noticed the tourist's eyes locking on him, and a self-satisfied smirk spread across his face. He thrived. Don't attention, relishing every moment of the spotlight nearby stood Richard Hunt, a tall, imposing guardsman who epitomized royal discipline. His crimson tunic gleamed in the sunlight, and his tall bearskin had accentuated his commanding stature despite the unfolding drama. Richard's face remained stoic, but behind the calm facade he could feel the tension building. This tourist was crossing a lane. You can't arm, huh? Jack taunted, taking a step closer to the barrier, his piercing gray eyes bore into Richard, his voice dripping with mockery. Or maybe you can't move without someone giving you an order. Richard stood firm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His breathing remained steady, but his muscles were taut. Every second of silence only added fuel to the fire. The crowd was beginning to split into factions. Some whispered to one another, concerned that Jack might get over. Others, visibly annoyed, quietly voiced their disapproval. This is unacceptable, muttered an elderly man in hat standing beside a young couple. Someone needs to stop him, the woman replied, clutching her partner's arm. But Jack paid no attention to their remarks. He was immersed in his own show. His friends standing a short distance away exchanged nervous glances on them. But Hall May, Nina Sports Jacket, tried to intervene. Jack, that's enough. This is the Royal Guard. They take their duty seriously. You're about to cross a line. Jack just laughed, brushing off the warning. Relax, they're not going to do anything. They're just part of the tourist attraction. With that, has stepped over the barrier. The crowd collectively gasped, as if the air had been sucked out of their lungs. Jack raised his hands and assumed a fighting stance. His pose was sharp, confident, a clear display of his skill and physical prowess. She executed a few quick shadow punches, the strikes fell, icing through the airwatch, and learned. He announced loudly to the crowd, I'll show you how real defense works. The crowd was frozen. Some watched with horror, others couldn't look away, sensing the situation was spiraling toward an unpredictable outcome. Some recorded the scene, while others shouted, stop, this isn't the place for your antics. But Jack was fully absorbed in his performance. His shouts echoed across the square, and his movements grew more exaggerated and provocative. Guardsmen Getretti held lunging forward. Richard stood like a stone statue. His gazes still fixed ahead. The tension around him was palpable. The crowd struck dumb. The spectacle seemed to hold its collective breath on the square. Only the sound of hearts pounding and the faint rustle of the breeze broke the eerie silence. Only Jack seemed to know or believe he knew what would happen next. The square in front of Buckingham Palace was thick with tension. Every eye was fixed on Jack Randall, whose arrogance had reached its zenith. His movements were sharper now, his voice louder, cutting through the still air. Well, mannequin, it's time for you to move. Jack Jared throwing a few quick punches into the air in Richard's direction. Richard's expression didn't change, not even a twitch, but his icy stare seemed to death. Carry an unspoken warning. It was the gaze of someone trained to remain calm, under pressure, but prepared for anything. Jack, basking in the crowd's attention, grinned even wider. He thrived on the cameras pointed at him, relishing the spotlight. His friends stood off to the side, whispering nervously. This is too much, muttered one of them, a tall man wearing a baseball cap's really going too far. But Jack wasn't listening. He was caught up in his own bravado, completely enthralled by his antics. All right, if you won't move, I'll show you what aerial attack looks like, he shouted, stepping forward with the dramatic flourish. It all happened in a fraction of a second. Jack lunged forward, aiming a high kick at Richard's shoulder. The crowd gasped, and someone even screamed, stop him, before Jack could complete his strike. Richard reacted with lightning speed. The guardsman stepped to the side with military precision, simultaneously catching Jack's leg mid-air. The movement was fluid, practiced, and devastatingly effective. The crowd erupted, some clapped in astonishment, while others shouted in disbelief. People couldn't comprehend how the stoic guardsman had so quickly transformed into a disciplined combatant. Jack lost his balance, his eyes widened in shock, his self-assured smirk replaced by an expression of pure disbelief. He tried to pull away, but Richard used his momentum against them with a swift, controlled motion. The guardsman sent Jack Sprout crawling to the ground. Jack hit the pavement with a dull thud, his palms instinctively bracing his fall. His arrogance hattered alongside his balance. Richard resumed his original stance, his back straight and his gaze once again fixed on the horizon. It was as if nothing had happened. The crowd buzzed with energy. Some shouted words of admiration. Incredible, hadn't even flinch. Now that's professionalism. Others were still real. From the shockish heat-rained fighter. How did he do that? Jack scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation. He stared at Richard, struggling to comprehend how the guardsman had turned the tables. Effortlessly, his voice faltered as she muttered, "You didn't even warn me." But his words were lost in the roar of the crowd. Richard remained silent, his face unchanging, but high, sun-yielding gazes seemed to convey a single message: don't try that again. The crowd continued to buzz with excitement. One bystander shouted, "That's what you get. Idiot, don't mess with the guards." Jack, seemingly deaf to the commotion, turned to his friend. His pride was in tatters, but he still didn't grasp the full extent of the fallout that was yet to come. The square in front of Buckingham Palace erupted with emotions. The crowd, which had initially observed Jack's antics with curiosity and confusion, transformed into a seething mix of condemnation and excitement. As soon as Richard skillfully brought Jack to the ground, people began clapping and shouting their support for the guard. Now that's what I'm talking about. Well done. Someone from the front row yelled, "That's professionalism, take a note." Another added, "Stillying on the pavement." Jack looked dazed and humiliated. His pride, along with his athletic reputation, had been shattered in front of dozens of onlookers. He quickly tried to salvage the situation, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just joking. You all took it the wrong way." His voice trembled, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Amid the murmurs and exclamations, 2 royal security officers emerged from behind the barriers. Leading them was a tall, stern-looking man in his 40s with a perfectly straight posture and a piercing, assessing gaze. His gray suit was immaculate, emphasizing his official authority. Behind him walked a younger officer holding a radio and scanning the scene. The crowd fell silent, instinctively making way for the officers as though understanding that justice was about to be served. Jack, still on the ground and trying to stand, locked eyes with the lead officer. The man wasn't visibly angry. His expressionless face was far more intimidating. As she reached Jack, he easily got forward and within a cyclone said, "Sire, you have just assaulted a member of the royal guard on duty. You are under arrest." The officer's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers and applause. Deserves him right. Disgraceful, respect the royal guard. Jack's face turned pale. He stammered, raising his hands, as if trying to plead his innocence. "I didn't mean it. It was a joke, just a demonstration. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." The officers ignored his excuses. The younger officer stepped forward, producing handcuffs with practiced efficiency. He swiftly cuffed Jack's wrists, immobilizing him. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The lead officer said, delivering the standard warning with crisp precision, leaving Jack no room for protest. The crowd encircled the scene, maintaining a respectful distance but growing louder with their remarks. "This should be a lesson. Respect the traditions or go back home." Phones were raised, high, capturing every moment of the arrest. Jack, who had previously relished the attention, now found himself trapped by this face, betrayed a mixture of despair and humiliation that no amount of confidence or physical prowess could conceal. "Listen, it was just a joke." "I'll apologize." Jack tried shouting over the commotion, but his words were drowned out by the growing noise of the crowd. The officers wusted not. I'm lifting him to his feet and escorting him toward a waiting patrol car parked nearby. The crowd parted, forming a narrow pathway. As Jack was led away, his face was red with embarrassment, his eyes desperately avoiding the many lenses capturing his every step. "This is N. To your care," a woman in the crowd shouted. "You'll see, they don't mess around with people like you," added an older man filming the scene on his phone. Jack gave up trying to justify himself. His head hung low as the officers led him away. Behind him were the heated murmurs of tourists, phone cameras clicking, and Richard Hunt, the very guard Jack had tried to humiliate. Richard stood silently throughout the ordeal, maintaining his perfect stance. His expression remained calm, but a flicker of cold determination still burned in his eyes. His bright red tunic, glistening under the sunlight, now stood as a symbol of honor. That noon could tarnish that day served as a stark lesson for everyone. The Royal Guard is not just a tourist attraction, but a representation of strength, dignity, and discipline, qualities that cannot be challenged without consequence. Barely an hour had passed since the incident when the video of Jack's fall at the hands of the Royal Guard flooded social media. Footage showing the former Karate champion being swiftly outmaneuvered by the guard went viral. Almost instantly, subscribers and journalists alike shared the clips, fueling widespread discussion. "This is incredible. That guard is a true professional." Read one of the first comments. "He should have known better. The Royal Guard is no joke," wrote another across platforms from Facebook to TikTok. The video was accompanied by sharp hashtags: #respect, tradition, #guard vs Karate champion, #tourist fail. The discussion quickly spread beyond the internet. Newspapers and news channels picked up the story, incorporating the footage into their broadcasts with headline such as "Tourist challenges guard and faces defeat," or "How artless stunt brought shame to a former champion. Jack in detention." Meanwhile, Jack found himself sitting in the cold, confined space of a Holden G-cell. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. His reflection in the steel sink no longer showed a confident fighter, but a man whose ego had been thoroughly dismantled. His lawyer, a young man in a crisp suit, stood opposite him, holding a folder filled with paperwork. "Do you realize your actions are now being discussed all over the country?" Hesked coldly, "You need to issue a formal apology." Jack exhaled heavily, the weight of the cell walls pressing in on him. Yeah, I get it. It was a mistake, but they could have handled it differently. He started attempting to justify High. Memiselv lawyer cut him off sharply. This wasn't just a mistake. Jacket was a complete failure, and if you want to salvage any part of your life, you'll need to take responsibility for your actions. The apology everyone was waiting for under pressure from his legal team and the overwhelming public backlash, Jack issued a formal apology the next day. Cameron captured him seated at a table wearing a stiff suit and sporting a tense expression. I want to apologize to the Royal Guard, to Richard Hunt, and to the entire country for my reckless action, she said, looking directly eye. And to the camera, it was a foolish and disrespectful stunt, and I deeply regret what I did, but viewers weren't quick to forgive now. We's sorry a little too late for that one commenter wrote an apology. It's meaningless. He should face the consequences, added another said impact on public opinion. While Jack's apology felt like a forced gesture to many, the image of Richard Hunt, the stoic and disciplined guard, became a beacon of honor. His composure and swift reaction drew widespread admiration. Now that is what a true professional looks like. Respect to Richard. This is a lesson for people like that tourist. The Royal Guard released an official statement emphasizing West and not only as a symbol of tradition, but also as protectors of the values of our country. Such behavior should not be normalized, and there will be serious consequences for those who cross the line. The fallout Jack remained the center of attention. Newspapers ran dramatic headlines, such as the fall of a proud karate champion, how a go and disrespect led to humiliation. Richard Hunt, the hero of the day. The story became a rallying cry for respecting hindrances, and those who fold them. Jack's name turned into a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that event the most confident individual. All scan falter when they overstep boundaries. The courtroom was packed act to capacity. Journalists with notepads and cameras filled every available seat, eager to cover the case already dubbed the Karate Champion trial. Jack had nose cape from the intense scrutiny. He sat on the defendant's bench, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. The confidence he had displayed so boldly in front of the crowd was now nowhere to be seen. The judge, a stern elderly man with a serious demeanor, looked over his glasses to survey the room. His voice was firm but steady. Let us begin. He hearing regarding Mrs. Jack Randall's assault, a member of the Royal Guard. Jack's lawyer rose his tone and measured as she attempted to soften the situation. Your Honor, my client's actions were nothing more than an ill-conceived joke. He did not intend to cause harm and did not grasp the seriousness of his behavior. The judge frowned, his gaze as edling on. Jack here repeated slowly, we have video evidence of showing your client deliberately crossing boundaries, eschewing threats, and attempting to physically strike an individual on duty. That cannot be excused as a joke. Insolence filled the courtroom. Journalists scribbled furiously, eager to capture every detail, testimonies and video evidences. Several tourists who had been present during the incident testified as witnesses, each confirming that Jack's actions were intentional. He was clearly trying to provoke the guards. A young woman in a sharp business suit, Wall saw him mocking and then attempting to strike the court, was then shown video footage from surveillance cameras and bystanders' phones. The clips displayed Jack raising his leg to kick, only to be brought down. Nana swiftly by Richard's impeccable reaction. Murmurs spread through the courtroom, and the judge banged his gavel to restore order. Your actions were dangerous and disrespectful. Judges said, addressing Jack directly, you insulted not only an individual, but the traditions that our guards represent. The verdict. After brief deliberations, the judge delivered his sentence to, hereby sentence you to 6 months in prison for assault and public disorder. May this serve as a lesson to you and to others. The verdict was met with mixed reactions in the courtrooms. Some applauded, while others whispered amongst themselves, debating the severity of the punishment. Jack sat motionless, the weight of public condemnation evident on his face. Public reaction outside the courthouse. Journalists and bystanders discussed the outcome. Many supported the decision. This is the right judgment, said a man in a business suit. Such antics cannot be tolerated. Respect the traditions, another shouted. Some, however, felt the sentence was overly harsh, but the majority agreed on one thing. This case has sent an important message to anyone thinking they could cross boundaries without consequence. Richard's return. Meanwhile, Richard Hunt resumed his post at Buckingham Palace, his figure as steady and upright as ever remained, a symbol of the Royal Guard's unwavering discipline. But now he was more than that in the eyes of the public. He was a hero, a man who had defended his honor and duty with grace and skill. A journalist standing near the barrier posed a question. Richard, what did you feel when you were attacked? He looked straight ahead, his voice calm and resolute. I did what I was trained to do, protect myself and my service. That's my duty. Conclusion. The story of Jack Randall, the former karate champion, became a universal reminder that disrespecting people and traditions has its consequences. His name remained in headlines as a cautionary example of how ego and arrogance can lead to disgrace. Meanwhile, Richard Hunt continued his service inspiring millions around the world with his resilience and professionalism.